My name is Susanne Boer. I'm a research advisor at the Faculty of Health and Medical Sciences, and I hope my presentation will come, yes. The last 1.5 years, I was part of a task force for research data management, and our task force was asked to produce a policy for research data management. Our task force consisted of a number of professors. Myself, I have a background in research as well, an IT person, so this talk will also be from the researcher perspective. So, why did we need to develop a policy? And that has been mentioned maybe a little bit already. The biggest reason is that it's being asked for in the Danish Code of Conduct for Research Integrity that came out at the end of 2014. Universities or even faculties were asked to produce their local policies on research data management. And I have to also say research data management is a very new field in Denmark. I think work has only intensified in the last 2 years, maybe. So this was kind of a challenge. Besides the Danish Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, we have heard this before, there are more and more demands by funders and journals, for example, for open access. Funders more and more ask for data management plans as part of funding proposals. For example, from next year onwards, the European funding framework, Horizon 2020, will ask for a data management plan as part of deliverables for all published projects. Then, of course, there are other increasing demands. The EU, for example, will come with a new personal data law. So, yeah, it is about time that we make some policies to help our researchers maneuver through data management. On top of that, when talking to researchers, you can identify that there actually are some problems or issues when it comes to data management. And just to name a few examples, there are no official teaching procedures for research data management, how you collect your data, how you process it, how you store it, archive it, share it. That is often just coming down to common sense, and what is common sense for one researcher obviously is not common sense for the next person. Every year we increase the volume of data that's being produced, and sadly we still on the short term have a lot of data loss because researchers don't always efficiently store or back up their data or secure it against unauthorized access. We also have a lot of data loss on a longer time scale because researchers don't always properly archive their data long term. The Danish Code of Conduct actually now says that research data should be archived for a minimum of 5 years after a project end. But I don't think this standardly happens yet. Researchers take their data with them to another appointment, leave it on their computer, or the web space where they store it on disappears. So this is also a problem. So we had to write a policy for data management, and what does our policy look like? Well, we decided to structure the policy according to what is called a research data lifecycle. And this research data lifecycle depicts various steps in data management that researchers go through when conducting a research project. And we have basically made our own version of a research data lifecycle. You can see that it has its various phases. First of all, when you start your research project, you have a planning phase where you determine who does what in a project. You need to get the right legal and ethical approvals, maybe material transfer agreements, etc., etc. Once you have that done, you go to a data collection phase and a data processing phase. Well, you end up with your final data set that you will use as the basis for any publications. In the meantime, you have to store these data somewhere as well. I mentioned that already. Where do you store it? How do you back it up? How do you make sure that people who shouldn't have access don't get access? And then when you're done, you may also want to or have to share your research data. Then your project ends, and as I also mentioned, there is actually then a 6th step where you should migrate your data set to an archive for long-term storage, after which it can be reused. So just spend the next couple of minutes just focusing on this first phase, the planning phase. So what type of things do you take into account before you start your research project? And focusing, of course, on rights and responsibilities to research data. Why is it important? I think the previous talks made it quite clear already, but why is it important that we have an element on rights or responsibilities or ownership of research data in our policies? Well, just to name a few examples, why is clarity necessary? Yeah, as has been mentioned, many of our researchers collaborate with other researchers with universities in Denmark, maybe abroad even, with industry partners, etc., etc. And these different collaborators may work with a different set of rules that you have to kind of figure out between you. Many researchers need to get, again, legal and ethical approvals if you work with animals, if you work with human data, human participants, for example. To figure out what you actually do when the project ends. Do you take it with you to a new place of employment, or does your institute have some place for this? That's actually very vague in many cases. And I actually just want to make this point that research is very international, so how does this all work in the Danish setting? I have a research background myself. I'm from the Netherlands. The labs that I worked in here were at least 50% foreigners, and they import their own country rules to their research here. So there's a lots of misconceptions on what you can actually do with data, because this is what we learned when I started in the US or in Australia. And just to make that a bit clear, here's an example. Okay, we now had to write the policy. We have to talk about rights and responsibilities of data. We started this work at the start of 2015. There was no detailed data management policy in Denmark at that point. So I just had a look, how do other universities in other countries describe this stuff? Well then, for example, the University of Sydney says the university asserts ownership over data and primary material. Same in the US, the university asserts ownership. So I thought, wow, that's actually really nice and easy. I'll just copy this, I'll put that in. The University of Copenhagen asserts ownership. Nice and straightforward for researchers. But yeah, let me just check whether at university level or national level there have been some clear regulations on this yet. And as you have seen in previous talks, well, it's very complicated, and no, there were not any. So it was already quite clear that I could not simply use similar statements in our policy. And yeah, Clément has given a very nice overview, which then I won't go in too much detail. But when I did a little bit of research, it became clear, first of all, what are primary material, what are data. This is going to depend very much on whether you're from the health faculty or whether you're from humanities. Everyone has a different concept, and depending on the type of data you have, there's different types of laws involved. So for me, with a background in research, for most people at our faculty, this is a huge, complicated area, really, that most researchers literally just want to stay out of because they are busy enough anyway. This is too complicated. And yeah, so what we did is actually visit Professor Rosenmeier, and together with the UBVA, they helped us tackle this issue. And we very quickly concluded that, yeah, we can't have this one-size-fits-all solution on data ownership, and actually in the end we avoid this term completely. So what we have done in our policy, and this is literally after the recommendations of the UBVA, is to say that researchers should simply talk to their collaborators. There could be an industry partner, it could even be a PhD student discussing things with their supervisor, at the start of their project, and identify legal issues, and if necessary, fix them into an agreement. So, as has been said, to what extent do you have access to the data, and can you obtain a copy? How are you using the data also for other projects? So for me personally, that is a question that was raised in my research. what happens when I leave the lab, right? Can I just take my data, move to another country, have a new set of collaborators, and use the same set of data for a different research purpose? Is already my old professor happy with this? Well, that's kind of stuff, or the university, right? This kind of stuff that you need to discuss beforehand. What are the terms governing data access and reuse, and are there possible disciplinary actions if I don't stick to these terms? Any IPR issues, of course. And then, of course, we took the recommendation from the UBVA, and we explicitly stated that any primary materials of physical nature do belong to the university. Yeah, so that is actually the overview, and if you are interested in our policy, it can be found on that website. It doesn't just cover rights and responsibilities, but this whole research data lifecycle. And I'm also plugging in the link to UBVA's recommendations, which are actually very researcher-friendly. So yeah, I recommend them as a read. That's it.